So I want to welcome the Office of Policy and Management to our hearing room today, and the full team that is here before us. I'm glad to see you all, and we're looking forward to having a deeper conversation following on the governor's presentation earlier this week and some of the conversations we had on the floor yesterday. So with that, I will ask my co-chair, Senator Fonfara, if he has any opening remarks.
Good morning, Madam Chair and everyone. Today's the day for me to listen and learn, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And our good ranking members, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. I will echo Senator Fonfara, listen, learn, and knowing it's me, weigh in with the occasional comment and pointed question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good to know. I'm glad we're all the same people that we were last week. And Senator Martin. Are you with us? We're all set? Okay, great. With that, we will begin. I pass the mic to the Office of Policy Management.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's nice to be here today. Representative Cheeseman, good to see you. Senator Martin, Senator Fonfara, distinguished members of the Finance Committee, the General Assembly. I hope you permit me just a moment to recognize the folks I work with, without whom all of this wouldn't be possible. You're going to be treated to a variety of documents from us. You've already seen them online, I think. They've been on our website for about 48 hours now. But I'm privileged to be a part of a team that includes some of the most knowledgeable and experienced professionals that the state of Connecticut has to offer. And I'm very proud of them. I just want to thank them publicly for all that they do. The governor's fiscal 24 and fiscal 25 budget is about inclusive. I'm sorry. Are we going to share our screen here? I could talk while he's getting our screen up. The governor's budget is about inclusive opportunity and economic growth. And the centerpiece of the governor's budget is broad-based middle-class tax relief, as well as important new investments in housing, and continuing our commitment, the governor's commitment to things like education and workforce and public safety, transportation, and of course, our social services safety net. Going to give you a budget overview. We put together a deck that's been on our website for a couple of days, as well as the budget narrative is up there. So you and your staff have had a chance to review that. In fact, they've produced a synopsis for you that we got yesterday afternoon. So I won't linger on every slide overly. I'll just hit some highlights and then we can get right to your questions. This first slide shows you our 11 funds that are in our proposed Appropriations Act. A couple of them are new: the Municipal Revenue Sharing Fund, the cannabis funds, the funds where the cannabis revenue will come and be dispersed according to the law. It's an all funds budget of $25 billion in the first year, $25.5 billion in the second year. First year's growth rate is 3.5% year over year. Second year's growth rate is 1.8%. This slide shows you our overview of the general fund. Highlights here are that we have surplus in the first year, or the current year. We're showing a current year surplus, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we're showing balance in both years of the biennium. In fact, based on your actions yesterday, those balance numbers increase because we are freezing the revenue cap at current year, not moving to the new percentages that you see on our slide. So in the first year, that's about a $56 million extra that you'll have in addition to what you see there, as well as $114 million in the second year because of the change in the revenue cap. On the next slide, we'll talk about the recommended use of our current year surplus. As I indicated, we've got $816 million available because the choices we're making are to spend $211 million of current year surplus to retire gap bonds. These are bonds we entered into a number of years ago with covenants that mandate that we make the payments necessary to erase a gap deficit. That will save us debt service costs of about $58 million a year, as well as resulting in $120 million a year that we will have as revenue that we can spend. We will use $314 million of the current year surplus to allow us to deallocate or reallocate ARPA funds that had been programmed previously as revenue replacement. So we'll be able to say going forward that we haven't used any federal funds to balance our budget, our general fund budget. And the remainder there, the $816 million, after we've made those choices, if you agree, along with our volatility cap deposits this year, are going to allow us to make deposits into the unfunded liabilities, which will realize an ADEC savings in fiscal 25 of $200 million. This slide shows you where the budget reserve fund is at the moment. We're showing we will have starting balances in excess of the current 15% threshold for the waterfall, even in excess of the eventual 18% threshold for the waterfall based on yesterday's action, which will allow us, as you can see, to continue to make sizable deposits into those unfunded liabilities. Of course, the fiscal year 24 number will require about 600 million to get up to the 18%. So that will be adjusted. There'll be about 650 million less deposited in 24. Moving to our general fund revenue proposals. So we're at the Finance Committee. We're going to talk about our revenue proposals, and there are 4 major proposals that the governor's making to provide relief to individuals and businesses in the state. He believes after 5 years of surpluses, it's time to allow our residents to retain more of the money that they earn. You can see the personal income tax cut there with the associated revenue impacts, the earned income tax credit increase with those numbers, the restoration of the pass-through entity tax credit to its original 93%, as well as a proposal regarding the human capital investment tax credit. This is under the corporation business tax, and we'll have slides upcoming on all of those. At the end of this biennium, if you adopt these measures, added to all the other previously enacted relief under the Lamont administration, we will have achieved tax relief in the amount of almost $900 million by the end of this biennium. This slide details our middle class income tax cut. The 5% rate is going to 4.5. The 3% rate is going to 2. It affects 1.1 million filers, about 63% of the total. And in fully annualized in fiscal 26, it's a $404 million revenue impact to the general fund. The earned income tax credit is being increased, 31% increase in the benefit affects 211,000 recipients. It will give our state the 5th highest state earned income tax rate in the country. We have a bar graph here. I'm sorry, this is a pie chart. Bars are different. They'll be on other slides. This is a pie chart, and it combines the impact, the attribution of the personal income tax cut and the increased earned income tax credit by adjusted gross income. As you can see, 77% of the benefit flows to individuals and families who make less than $150,000 a year. And between the middle class income tax cut and the increased EITC, families of 4 making up to $50,000 will have no state income tax liability. Detail on the pass-through entity tax credit. This brings it back to its originally adopted 93% level. We're also proposing making the tax optional. In every other state that has a pass-through entity tax, they make it optional for the entities to pay this way. So we're going to join them. This affects 123,000 entities. Of note, the revenue impact here, most of it is on, this is a volatility cap revenue. So it affects the volatility cap to the effect of 48 million. It's a $12 million impact to the general fund. The human capital investment tax credit is under the corporation business tax. It's currently a 5% tax credit for certain kinds of expenses, and those are listed in the middle of the graph there: job training, worker education, worker training, and donations of capital or capital contributions to higher ed. But it also has a credit for expenses made by corporations for childcare, including the provision of subsidies to the employees or establishing a childcare center. With regard to the non-child care, we're increasing the credit from 5% to 10% of qualifying expenses. But for childcare, we're increasing it from 5% to 25% and allowing the corporation to claim it against up to 70% of their tax liability, whereas currently they are restricted to 50% of their tax liability. Governor's hoping to encourage businesses to do more in the area of childcare. This is part of our workforce development push and trying to get more childcare out there. Other revenue proposals that you're probably aware of or should be, we are maintaining the 10% corporate tax surcharge. It's been in effect for many years. We're proposing extending it for 3 more years. It affects those firms with gross income over 100 million. The angel investor tax credit was expanded recently in anticipation of the cannabis market being stood up. We believe that given the overwhelming response and overwhelming interest of entities entering the cannabis market, that this is not needed any longer, and we can save that revenue there by repealing the expansion to the cannabis businesses. We are revising the estate tax filing deadline. This is not a tax cut. We will realize this revenue, but we are realigning it with the federal tax filing deadline, the state deadline and the federal deadline. This was a revenue raising maneuver done during the Great Recession period when we were looking for revenue one year. And so this advanced some revenue in a fiscal year where we needed it. Going forward, we're going to lose 38 million in the first year, but we will eventually get the revenue. It's just that it will come a little bit later. We expect this will enhance compliance by taxpayers, as well as making it easier for DRS to administer. Again, I spoke of the gap bond retirement. That's what the first part details. The Tobacco and Health Trust Fund, last year near the end of the session, you provided for a revenue transfer from the general fund to this new Tobacco and Health Trust Fund. That board is being stood up. It's been out of business for several years, but it's being stood back up. It's not quite together. But when it is, it will have the 12 million you transferred last year to allocate for spending, as well as we're proposing 6 million additionally each of the years of the fiscal years coming up in the biennium. So they'll have about 24 million total to allocate for tobacco prevention activities. We're proposing disconnecting the iLottery revenue from the debt-free community college fund account. The revenues attributable to iLottery will not actually cover that expense for several more years. It will be toward the end of the decade before there's enough to cover it. So we're going to go ahead and recommend disconnecting it. And we have brought, and we'll be talking to your colleagues in APROPS later this afternoon. We've brought the debt-free community college program, the PACT program, online in the general fund. We're going to appropriate the money directly, not rely on this revenue intercept. In the area of municipal aid, we're not proposing any changes to municipal aid in terms of what the towns receive. So there'll be no changes from the town's perspective, but we would like to change, and we're recommending that you change the way we organize at least part of municipal aid. It's a fairly complicated system that we have today. Some of it's on budget, some of it's off. One of the difficulties that we've encountered this year with the municipal revenue sharing account, which pays for the new tiered pilot system, as you can see there, it's currently funded by 0.5% of the sales and use tax. We have to, under the law, allow that revenue source to accrue in the account before we're able to make disbursements. And in fact, the law was written to allow us to make the pilot payments in the springtime. The trouble is the towns, cities were used to getting their pilot payments in the fall. So we made some maneuvers administratively this past fall to make that happen. I won't bore you with the details of how we do that, but to avoid that going forward, we propose a change in the way that we organize our municipal aid, which is shown on this graph. We're going to take those 5 buckets of municipal aid, which are scattered around the Appropriations Act, bring them into one fund where we can see them all. And by putting them on into the Municipal Revenue Sharing Fund in the Appropriations Act, that by itself will give us the authority to allocate the money at the beginning of the fiscal year. That will be our authority to spend. It'll be an appropriated fund within the Appropriations Act. So we'll bring all of these online and we'll show you what that looks like in the budget summary on the next slide. You can see the revenues coming in, still getting 0.5 of the sales tax, 0.5% of the sales tax going to this fund. It was going to the MRSA account. Now it's going to the MRSA fund. We've got a transfer of the general fund. Line number 2 there matches line number 8. Those are a couple of payment lists that exist in the back of the act that have been there for about a decade. They're no longer tied to any particular policy or statute, but they were payment lists that were put in place to hold towns harmless during a couple of different years when there were changes in the budget. Towns were being affected, but in order to hold them harmless, they were given these payment lists. So they're historic. We're calling them now the supplemental revenue sharing grants. And so we're transferring those from the general fund to this new fund. We as well have to make an additional general fund transfer to cover all of these expenses. The 0.5 sales tax doesn't cover all of municipal aid. It wasn't even going to cover all of the tiered pilot going forward as other things came into MRSA. But you can see what will be on budget there. The tiered pilot program, its numbers, the motor vehicle tax, sometimes called the transition grant account, is there. The two payment lists I just talked about are combined. And of course, the Mashantucket Pequot Fund will also be here. This is a municipal aid. These are general government non-education grants to the towns administered by OPM. They'll be in one place in their own fund on the Appropriations Act where everyone can see them. Easier for us to budget and easier for us to administer and clearer. And yes, under the spending cap. With regard to solid waste management and the future of the Mira site in Hartford, this has involved some bond funds in the past. It may involve some in the future, and involves an assessment, per ton assessment for solid waste that the towns pay. So it's of interest to the Finance Committee. The waste to energy plant in the South Meadows of Hartford has closed, and it needs to wind down its operations. It has existing contracts and properties and transfer stations. It's working with towns to continue to dispose in one way or another of their waste. But to deal with the deficit in waste disposal capacity, the governor is proposing a legislative package for waste reduction strategies, as well as a temporary authority that will take over MIRA as it winds down. It includes legislative and executive branch appointments. MIRA has a sizable amount of reserves, we believe, that we can use for this winding down process, as well as to fulfill MIRA's obligations under their existing contracts. We're going to have our colleagues at DAS take over and manage the property while we assess the need to remediate it. And we hope to get it redeveloped and back on the tax rolls for the city at some point in the future. Part of the plan is to increase the solid waste assessment that towns pay for disposal of municipal solid waste. It's currently $1.50 per ton. We're going to increase that to $3 a ton for in-state disposal, $5 a ton for out-of-state disposal, to encourage towns to find strategies for dealing with that in-state. It's always a goal of ours to be self-reliant in terms of disposal of municipal solid waste. But we're going to have to probably have some future infrastructure investments necessary for that disposal. So it's hoped that in the future, this solid waste assessment might serve as a revenue stream for revenue bonds that we would issue. Wouldn't have to use GEO bonds. We could use revenue bonds using the solid waste assessment as the source to pay those back if we had to build different kinds of facilities in the future to deal with this solid waste disposal deficit. It might be waste to energy. It might be something else. There are other emerging technologies. DEEP's going to be working on that issue to find out what's the best way forward. What are the best practices going forward? The legislative package also includes some waste diversion, organics management, and packaging producer provisions. Taking you to our transportation fund. This is the summary of your STF showing operating surpluses this year and the next 2 years, as well as a healthy cumulative balance for the foreseeable future. We do see healthy balances there in the operating surplus through 25, but I think as early as 26, we move back toward the red based on the revenue and costs that we're seeing at this time. But we're in the black for this biennium, and we will, as I like to say, chop that wood when we get there. DOT is getting some additional resources to support the federal infrastructure investments that are coming from the federal government over the next several years. Billions of dollars in federal funds are being made available. We'll have to match that. We'll have to have engineers and project managers to work on all those projects. We've got some resources going to DOT for work zone safety. Another municipal grant maneuver we're doing this year, Town Aid Road is currently a bonded item. It's on the capital budget at $60 million. We propose to take it out of the capital budget, pay that out of STF over the next 2 years, freeing up some debt service for projects and reducing our borrowing costs. Of interest, I'm sure, to this committee, particularly because we have reallocated $315 million of revenue replacement. This is ARPA money that was being used for revenue replacement. We don't need it because of the current year surplus, so we are able to reallocate it, as well as another 120 or so million from other sources. We noticed with some interest that you reallocated $60 million yesterday for a new source. So the remainder amount, which was going to be about 117 million after we were done reallocating in our budget, is probably down to about 57 million based on yesterday's action. As you can see, the largest single item, and we'll be talking, I'm sure, extensively with your colleagues on approach this afternoon, is higher education support. We are actually allocating $256 million for higher ed support for the biennium to continue to get them to a better place, we hope, and a sustainable place. Some capital budget highlights for you. Your proposed bond act will have an historic amount of money, which we will talk about in just a minute, for housing. But as well, there are the other categories where we typically see bond funds being used. Those are listed there. Our GO authorizations in the biennium are in line with recent history, about 1.4 billion in new authorizations in the first year, about 1.6 in the second year. STF new authorizations similarly there in keeping with recent history. We have another pie chart. It's not a bar chart, it's a pie chart. And it shows you that transportation is the single largest capital authorization item that we're proposing, followed by infrastructure, education, housing, and economic development. To the housing highlights, it's $600 million, and I think there's yet another slide somewhere that adds this up, but it is $600 million over the biennium for things like affordable housing, workforce development housing, and the popular Time to Own program, which is a forgivable down payment assistance for folks below the average median income for their geographic area. Popular program that's helped quite a few people recently since it was stood up last spring. You've got the numbers there: 100 million for workforce development, 50 million annually for the Housing Trust Fund, and 100 million annually for flexible housing. We're expecting to add 2,200 new units under affordable housing and about 2,000 new units under workforce development. That's matching, I think, about 2,000 that are already in development based on previously allocated resources. Governor's very interested in doing all we can to address the housing shortage. He likes to say we have about 100,000 jobs that are going unfilled. We'd like to get them filled, but when they get filled, those people need places to live. So we've got to build more housing in our state. As well, we've got energy and environmental health, the usual authorizations and recommendations there, particularly around clean water funding, and economic development, additional authorizations for small business, brownfields, and manufacturing innovation. In the area of education, that first bullet there shows you where we're supporting the colleges and universities with their capital plant, their physical plant. That's mostly repairs and maintenance and some small projects that they have. For school construction, which, as you all know, is our single largest allocation on an annual basis, at the Bond Commission, we are authorizing in the second year an additional tranche of $250 million authorized for school construction. We have presently authorized for school construction some $800 million, so we don't have a need to make a new authorization in the first year. We are continuing the indoor air quality HVAC separate set of investments from the school construction budget. DAS is managing that effort. In the current year, it's 75 million from ARPA, 75 million from the capital budget. It's 150 million this year. We're proposing another 150 million a year for the next 2 years for school air quality improvements. In transportation, they're going to be matching that federal infrastructure funds with those dollars and getting 1.5 billion for it. And our regular state highways, bridges, and municipal transportation projects will be getting the 2.2 billion in transportation authorizations. In conclusion, the governor's budget provides for broad-based middle-class tax relief and historic investment in housing in the state, continuing the governor's commitment to things like workforce, education, and transportation, and childcare. We will be talking to appropriations about providing sustainable support for higher education, as well as strengthening our social safety net and ensuring equity for all of our state's residents. Our budget is balanced without gimmicks, and it complies with all existing caps. And with that, we'll try to respond to any questions you have.
Thank you, Secretary Beckham. You packed a lot of information into a thick presentation, so thank you for that. I know we will have many questions today. I will, before we get into that round, just sort of remind everyone of our custom of limiting ourselves to 2 questions and trying to keep exchanges to 5 minutes, at least on round 1. I'm sure we will have have a round after that and we will return to that. I certainly have a list longer than 2 questions of my own. So I guess I will start off with a couple of questions of mine. First of all, what I was looking for in your slide deck that you went through today on page 12, the pie chart that lays out, it's on the personal income tax cut and the EITC. Look at slide 12. And this is just probably a request for information. What I would really appreciate seeing here is them broken out. Who is affected by which tax cut and how they, to try to get a little more granular information on that, because I know there was a statement in one of the budget books about the progressive nature of I'm about to violate my own rule about 5 minutes, so I'll stop. But at any rate, there's some interesting data there, and I'd love to see that broken down.
Yes, we have an attribution tables. I sometimes mistakenly call them incidence tables, but my section chief reminded me they're attribution tables. And we will make those available to you. In fact, we'll probably put those on the website. And we have one that has an example of a combined EITC and personal income tax cut for a particular set of filers, two dependents, family of 4. We'll get that to you as soon as possible and probably put it on our website as well.
Excellent, thank you.
It's I can tell you that for the personal income tax cut, the benefits are up to about $600 per joint filer in I think it's between 75 and 150, and it's up to about $300 for single filers.
Thank you. And picking from my list here, I guess my second question will be about issues, solid waste and MIRA. And I wondered, and I understand that this is both a finance and appropriations issue, so it sort of sprawls across both. But you mentioned among your comments that, incentivizing towns to do it in state. And so so as you know, I represent the Northwest corner where I have many towns that are desperately trying to do more composting, and the transportation costs are prohibitive. And what they actually want is permission to coordinate with Massachusetts or New York because it's more convenient for them. So I want to make sure that you're taking that into consideration when, you looking at rural areas that really want to do this better.
Yep.
But the state is not making it easier for them.
Right.
And they're, like everyone else, their tipping fees are off the charts already. So I wondered if you could comment on that.
I've had numerous conversations with Commissioner Dykes about this topic, and I'm sure she'll be discussing that at length with the Environment Committee, probably the Finance Committee at some point. What we have in mind is we would like to avoid the long distance transport to Pennsylvania and Ohio and the landfilling that takes place there. That's got obvious detrimental impacts on the environment. If there was something local where, from Sharon over the line to somewhere in Mass or somewhere in New York, that may not be as big a deal. I'm a little outside my brief here talking about environmental protection, but I'm sure Commissioner Dykes will be happy to discuss that at length as well. But I take your point. The object here is to try to make it easier for towns. Part of the use of that per ton assessment fee increase will be to support municipalities, to create programs to support them in their efforts to reduce their waste disposal issues.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I will see, does my co-chair have any questions that you want to start off with?
Still learning, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Cheeseman.
Madam Chair, you didn't even have to ask me that question.
It wasn't a question.
Yes,
It was
it did.
I'm
I'm
calling
calling you. Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. So obviously the emphasis is on providing broad-based middle-class tax cuts. We have heard a lot of concern, desire to continue the child tax credit. Can you discuss why you think this is a really better way to provide that broad-based middle tax?
Sure.
Tax, certainly, and I'm gratified that you're embracing something that we on my side believe very strongly, that we should be as broad-based and help as many people as possible.
Sure. I'll note that the earned income tax credit, is itself a child tax credit. You get a bigger benefit if you have dependents. It goes up to one to three dependents. So there's some child tax credit ideas built into this package. But as you point out, it's broad-based. Everyone gets it, regardless of whether you have a child or not, regardless of whether or not you have its retirement income or not. I know that's an interest of some people. So it's broad-based, and that's where the governor wanted to land. He wanted to help as many people as possible and return their hard-earned money back to them in an era when we're running surpluses at the state level. So it's time to think about the taxpayers.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Secretary. The other question I have is with regard to the human capital tax credit. And again, I've always maintained I would love to see employers both have skin in the game and an incentive to provide, particularly childcare, where we know that is a problem for many people who want to return to the workforce, particularly women. I see the bottom line cost of that is not that great. Currently, what are we seeing in terms of take up by corporations, and what do you see going forward? Because this is obviously key both for them and for everyone working in Connecticut.
I think it's 2.5 million is the uptake now. It's fairly low. We're hoping to encourage more participation by making it more generous. I'd like to see that revenue impact there be worse. I'd like to see them take that up and start spending that. That'd be great. I'd be happy to accommodate that in the budget.
Okay, thank you. And I know we discussed this and then I'll be quiet. I'd love to see that extended to help with housing. Either, low interest, no interest payments for down payments or security deposits, or indeed developing their own housing, as we're seeing throughout other parts of the country. So
the more the merrier. The more that we have the private sector involved in some of these public policy goals, the better.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Member. I know Vice Chair Farrar has some questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy Friday, everyone. Nice to see everyone after a long week. Thanks for the presentation. And as was noted by the questions that have already been asked, I no doubt that we'll be coming to you today with questions, but more as we go through session. I in particular actually wanted to get at one of the things that I was mindful of when I was reading through the narrative of the budget and certainly looking at some of these slides too. Last year, one of the things we had passed as a part of the Public Act 22-118 was a request on for you all from the governor's budget to actually analyze your proposal according to equity. And I saw some of that in the narrative, but I wanted to dig into that a little bit with my questions because thoughtfully from the Department of Revenue Services and their tax incidence reporting, we know that in our state, our working people are paying 4 times in their annual income than the wealthiest. And when I was kind of looking for analyzing these proposals, I kept thinking about this aspect of equity. So as you all kind of look at the overall proposals that you've provided to us, can you kind of capture in any way what you think the total impact of those really are for residents on their state and local taxes? And are these proposals overall more progressive for our residents?
Absolutely. We already have a very steeply progressive income tax. About 2% of our population pays over 1/3 of the income tax. The income tax raises about $10 billion a year. The fact that we can make such a significant cut for such a significant number of people at the lower end, and it only costs us $400 million, tells you that folks at the lower end are not paying that much of our income tax. It's vastly the folks at the higher end who are paying the personal income tax in our state. We have a number of provisions in our law today, even before our cuts, that ensure that our income tax is steeply progressive. It has 7 brackets, and those brackets have in the statutes a couple of complicated formula that lay on top of them that make them even more progressive. There are some statutory numeric formulas. They're called credits, but they're not policy credits. They're just numeric credits that ensure that folks at the lower end pay less than they otherwise would if you simply applied the statutory rate to them. As well, there are recapture provisions that were not adopted about a dozen years ago that require that the top end pays every dollar, starting with their first dollar at the 6.99%. They don't get the benefit of those earlier lower rates. So we have a steeply progressive income tax in the state. The earned income tax credit goes to people who don't even pay the income tax, but they do pay the sales tax. So it's a very good thing that we do for workers at the lower end and their families. As I noted before, it's got a child tax credit component. The more independence you have, the greater your EITC benefits. So again, helping those lower income folks pay less and actually get a refundable credit for the sales tax they pay. So our proposals make our already steeply progressive income tax even more progressive.
I appreciate that. I want to be mindful certainly of my 5 minutes and just have a second question because I appreciate your answer. I think it doesn't necessarily get at the overall impact that I was asking about. So would you be willing to provide the committee any further details about how, for instance, the pass-through entity tax affects the tax code being more progressive or regressive and some of the other proposals that you've made as well?
Sure.
That would be, I think, very helpful to our decision making so we can see the full capture of this.
Yeah.
And with the pass-through entity tax, can you specifically get at kind of from a regressive or progressive approach, who that would most affect?
Well, the impetus for the pass-through entity tax was not to get progressive or more or less progressive. It was to remedy an unnecessary revenue maneuver that was done a few years ago just to raise revenue. For that 5% difference, it's actually double taxation. The member is getting taxed on their revenue or income from the entity, and the entity is also paying tax on it. But if you give them that 93% credit, they're paying 6.99 and the entity is paying 6.99. It's to avoid a double taxation situation. It was designed with a very specific purpose of allowing people to work around from the SALT deduction limitation that the Trump administration put in place. And we were trying to make it simpler and easier for businesses who organize as a partnership or an LLC to take full advantage under federal law. So it was done with that intent, and we're simply correcting that unnecessary double taxation for that 5% delta. So that's what that's about. That's not really about progressivity. It does happen to help a lot of smaller businesses who are the backbone of our economy and are important in their districts and in their towns. They're restaurants and bars and hardware stores and the like. And so we think that that's an important thing to do. With regard to progressivity, our sales tax is also fairly progressive in as much as it exempts food, it exempts prescription drugs, and as well as non-prescription drugs. We have a luxury tax in our state at 7.75% on cars and jewelry and clothing over certain dollar amounts. That's only paid by wealthy individuals. We're one of only 17 states in the union to have an estate tax. We're also the only state in the union to have a gift tax. The federal government has one. Connecticut's the only state to have a gift tax at certain levels. So there's also a mansion tax under our real estate conveyance tax. We've made a number of moves over the years to enforce progressivity in our tax code.
Again, I appreciate it and would love more detail on each of the proposals if you all kind of would analyze them from a progressive or regressive standpoint, because I think that would really help us as a committee make decisions, especially as I said, in reference to the incidents reporting for our state. So I'll end there and refer to Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I will now look around the room and I see Representative Brown online has his hand raised. The floor is yours, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Beckham, thank you for presenting on that budget. I did step away for a brief second, so I may have missed this section. We know that the legislature previously authorized and the governor eventually signed Connecticut baby bonds. And what I didn't see in this proposal, and I haven't had a chance to go through the actual packet, but can you talk to me about what the process is going to look like? Or is this program not something that this governor is looking to do?
Well, I'd start with the latter phrase. The governor has made it clear whenever asked that he doesn't support this particular program. It is an authorized program for bonding, 50 million a year. It's been delayed. I believe it's authorized for July 1 of 24. The program itself was delayed till July 1 of this year in terms of the intake for eligible individuals. The General Assembly did not provide the operating budget necessary for the Department of Social Services to stand this up. When we worked on this issue in the summer of 21, after it passed, it was apparent that DSS would need quite a substantial staff to make this work. They would have to identify and track and determine the eligibility for infants born on Husky. It's about 14,000 kids a year, I think, who are born on Husky. DSS knows who their mothers are, but they don't know who they are. They don't necessarily have social security numbers. They don't necessarily have names when they're born. So someone's got to do that work and keep tabs on them, and then determine their eligibility at the other end when they come in at age 18 for the disbursement. That was never provided. That's a very substantial thing that would have to be done to even begin to think of standing up this program from an administrative point of view. You would also have to work on the issue related to how do you fund the accounts, or how do you fund those disbursements at the age 18. And the governor doesn't believe that we should bond for that. We shouldn't borrow money for that. He believes that in a budget of limited resources, that we should focus on the programs that we have always focused on in our budget, and which we have new, meaningful, significant investments that will make a difference in kids' lives long before they're 18. Early childhood, K-12 education, healthcare, assistance to families in need, scholarship opportunities, debt-free community college, all these things that we spend money on to invest in kids from disadvantaged backgrounds long before they're 18. We prioritize that. That is what the literature tells us makes a difference in someone's life. Whether or not getting a check for 15,000 or 20,000 when you turn 18 would be much of a difference in someone's life is open to question. But certainly the governor believes that we should prioritize the investments that we've always made, and that he proposes significant new investments for in his budget.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I may follow up.
I think that would count as question 2, Representative Brown. So go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, so you mentioned two things. One being that the process to administer this program would be significantly costly. And the legislation that was passed by the General Assembly did provide means to fund the administration of this program. It's 336C, that all expenses shall be paid from the assets of the trust. The second thing you mentioned was that we know, or that the governor believes, that these programs that are already in place are better suited to lift folks who are born into poverty out of poverty. And in no way am I saying that this should be an either or situation. We believe, the legislature agreed, that we can do both. We can provide access to healthcare, we can provide housing, we can provide tax credits, and we can also provide equity in our communities, because in Connecticut, there are 2 Connecticut's, and there's those that benefit in counties. In Fairfield County, for example, Bridgeport being a part of it, it's a stark difference where children born in 06604 versus 06610. And the folks in my district specifically would benefit greatly from a program like this. And I'm wondering why the governor signed this into law if he had no intentions on implementing.
The governor often, multiple governors throughout history have signed large omnibus bills with bond provisions that may or not be advisable. It's what you do at the end of the session. So as I said, the governor believes that we should invest, and it's a limited budget with limited resources. We can't fund every good idea. We can't fund every noble program. I get the appeal of the idea. I get the support that it has, but it has to fit within the contours of a balanced budget that stays under our caps and doesn't make our out-year problems more difficult. If the General Assembly in its wisdom is able to do that, is able to provide the appropriations level support for DSS to administer, as well as a long-term funding source for the accounts, we will take a look at that proposal. The use of the bonds to pay for ongoing administrative costs is not something that is considered acceptable. So the extent to which the bond funds could be used to administer the program is not something that would be in the best practice from a fiscal perspective. So we would not elect to do that. We would look for an appropriation for the operating costs of running the program.
I yield my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to toggle back and forth between in the room and on screen. So I believe next up is Representative Paletta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, and thank you for that very thoughtful and thorough presentation. It wasn't long ago when I got here back in 2017 that we were in a fiscal crisis. And during that period, it was a time of uncertainty. It was a time of dissatisfaction for residences, for businesses. We as legislators were flooded with calls about, what's next, what tax is going to go up, what's going to cost me more money in the future. Can I afford to pay my bills? And fast forward, as a result of a very thoughtful bipartisan budget that was crafted by many people in this room, both elected and not, that are still here, and it has produced a problem, a good problem, and that is a surplus. And that's why we're able to talk about programs that might help people, lift people out of poverty per se, and programs that will help the middle class, that will help small businesses. But one thing I'll say as a comment, and then I'll follow it up with a question is, we voted yesterday on these guardrails, and these guardrails, again, were put in place 6 years ago to protect the state and so we can accrue money that is extra and save it so that way we can pay down our unfunded liabilities. Because as you know, our debt is in the I think it's $80+ billion, and we're one of the most indebted states in the country. And is that correct? 88. Okay. All right. I stand corrected. So, we are one of the most indebted states in the country, and I applaud the governor. For tackling this issue, for realizing that it's a problem, and for coming and putting a budget forward that actually admits we have a problem and appropriates money so that we can pay down this debt. So that way, when I'm out of here and these folks up here are out of here, our kids and grandkids have a better future in Connecticut and don't have to go through that permanent fiscal crisis that we experienced when I first got here. So I thank you for that. My question is really geared towards transportation. So if I understood you correctly, in year 26, we were going to be in the red in the transportation budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my question is regarding our ridership, our rails, our bus services. I'll just kind of highlight CT Fast Track. I know that, the ridership in I think it was 2018, they said it was around 10,000 people per year. Do we expect that ridership now with people going back to work? Is it increasing? Is it the same? Is it lower?
Yes.
What can you speak to that briefly?
Yes, bus ridership is well back to pre-pandemic levels. And we'll be talking to the Appropriations Committee this afternoon about an increased appropriation out of the STF for bus service. We're trying to stand up more bus service, increased routes, expanded networks, particularly around employment and employment hubs, getting more people, more options for 7 days a week, second and third shift, that sort of thing. And we expect that to be utilized going forward. Yes. So more ridership there. Also on rail, we're going to be adding some money for rail. Ridership is not back to pre-pandemic levels for rail. And we've got different levels of support there. So I think I don't have my approach thing is somewhere else, but here we go.
Thank you. So
We can do rail if you want. New Haven line, the ridership is at 68% of pre-pandemic levels, but we're going to propose to fund that at 86. Hartford line's at 81%. We're going to fund that at 100% because we recently got some federal money and they don't let you cut service if you've used federal money to improve those lines. Shoreline East, however, remains our least used spur, and it's at 30% pre-pandemic use, but we are going to fund 44% level of ridership there, service level there for East Shoreline East.
thank you for that response. And then my only, comment would be that, if the fund is going to be back in the red in 26, we should, perhaps take a look at, the ridership, the levels, and prioritize kind of where we see the money being fit the best. And I'll just say, you know, in terms of the CT fast track, I think it was supposed to cost us something like $10 million a year. Now I think it's costing us like 17 or 18 million
Sure.
to run that. So perhaps, you know, shifting some money around and finding the transportation methods that are too costly, maybe trying to focus on something that's less costly would be in our best interest. That would just be my recommendation. Thank you.
I agree with that. As well, debt service, we need to calibrate the rate at which we do spend for projects as well, because debt service is part of that. So, but yes, your points are well taken.
Thank you, Representative. We'll go now to Representative Doucette.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you, sir.
A quick comment and then a couple of questions. I'll try to be efficient with my 5 minutes. The comment has to do with the housing in the capital plan. Certainly appreciate the governor's increased investment in housing. Obviously, I don't have to tell anyone in this building that that's very important this year. And I suspect we'll get into this further on the geo bonding subcommittee. And also, I know the Banks Committee is going to be talking with CHFA a little bit as well. But one thing I do want to highlight, and we'll continue to do so, is the Time to Own program, which is a tremendously successful program. I think from what we've seen since that program was instituted, the 50 million for each fiscal year would probably at the current rate only get us through, you know, the first 4 or 5 months of the year at the rate that they're going right now.
Right.
So I think we need to look at bumping that up. And I know there's probably flexibility in the Housing Trust Fund to do that and to make those changes as we go through the year. But I want to continue to highlight that's I think it's a great program. Helps low to moderate income home buyers, first time home buyers, and but we need to certainly pump a little bit more into that
We'll
to
keep an eye on
maximize
that. As you
investment.
know, there's the reservations, the amount that people sign up for and apply for, but then there's the closing. So we haven't actually moved all of that, but you're right there. We're at about 36 million as of this month in reservations. So yes, it'll go fast. It's popular.
Yeah, no, it's a great program. And then a couple of questions. The PAC program, you mentioned the decoupling of that from the iLottery. And that's fine. I guess what I want to know is that something that we need to keep our eye on in 2 years. Statutorily, as I recall, those two programs are sort of intertwined, right? And if not, do we need to make any adjustments now to make sure that we don't have a problem in 2 or 4 years?
Yeah.
Making sure that, you know, and seeing that program get cut.
You won't have a problem if you follow our proposal, which is to decouple them completely. iLottery will simply go into the general fund and we're going to appropriate money to Debt-Free Community College. We'll be keeping an eye on it separately, see what its needs are. We'll be appropriating it separately. It won't be tied to iLottery at all.
But we'll need to do that every 2 years, in other words.
Oh, sure. Like every other line item.
Okay. Just again, something to keep an eye on in the future. And my second question is something you didn't mention because you'll probably be touching on it today in appropriations, and that is the medical debt proposal.
Yes.
What is the source of revenue for that? And
ARPA.
I thought it was ARPA. And then my second question would be, are there any restrictions on the use of those particular funds or that bucket of funds that's used to fund that proposal on the ARPA?
We believe it's ARPA eligible medical debt. We don't have any indication that it's not. So we think it will comply with the U.S.
But
Treasury guidelines.
within that, is it restricted to, you know, human services related, or is there any other restriction on the use of that funds? Can it be used for any other, you know, just trying to brush up my recollection of how
ARPA's we have a wide variety of things that we're spending ARPA money on. It's the Treasury guidelines were fairly generous. They meant for it to be used by states to deal with their issues during the pandemic period. So we don't have any concerns about it being used for that purpose. It's used
Okay.
for any number of health and human services. You've already allocated quite a bit of ARPA for health and human services projects of one kind or another. Absolutely.
Okay.
And we're recommending some more.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to know what our options are for that.
I'm told on page 49 of our budget narrative, there are links to a variety of guidance on ARPA
Mhm.
usage.
I've looked at them. It's been a while and it's pretty
Yeah.
dense. But thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Next, I'll call on Rep. Mushinski, followed by Rep. Bronco and Rep. Elliott. So I'll look for it.
Thanks, thanks, Madam Chair. Jeff, I'm very appreciative to the attention to in-state waste management and the fee structure to incentivize that. Do you think the fees going into a one pot will be a way we can provide state investment to encourage the towns to join together and use some newer technology to handle waste in state?
I certainly hope so for that and for many other purposes. I would love to encourage a lot more regional shared services among towns. We have some existing resources we do that with already in our regional performance incentive program. But yes, absolutely. Anything we could do more cost effectively to deal with that issue, we would be very supportive of.
Okay, and then my other question is, we had a lengthy hearing on energy costs the other day, and the immediate reason for the price increase is that the utilities are buying on the spot market to add natural gas to their system, and they have to pay these exorbitant prices because they're buying on the spot market. On the energy slice of the ARPA pie, which you had the slide there for a little while. Are we investing heavily into weatherization so we can help homes and businesses reduce their energy demand during this temporary time of high price?
To the ARPA specific question, I'm not sure if there's an ARPA allocation that goes directly to that. I know I'm aware of other funding sources for that. There's certainly capital funds being made available for state buildings in terms of energy efficiency. But as well, I would commend you to Senate Bill 979, which is a governor's bill on energy affordability generally. It's going to have some components there, provisions that we hopefully allow for more upgrading and construction of transmission lines and build out additional electric transmissions lines to make the energy costs in our state more affordable.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to looking at that more carefully. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Mushinski. Representative Bronco.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, and your team for coming in today. I do appreciate this overview, and it's very helpful. Mine, I think, is short. I'm happy to see the pass-through entity tax restored to the 93% level, 0.01% level. And I think I like the option to choose how you pay it. And just for clarification, nothing changes in the amounts paid. You either choose to pay it as the business or as the members. So the members come tax time, they just opt out and pay.
That's right.
Individually as members.
That's right. That's the only change, is to make it optional as well to restore the credit amount.
Okay. That's all I was looking for. So thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Next up, we have Representative Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How's it going? Good to see you.
Going well.
All right. I have a couple questions and I have one quick statement. So I'll start with the statement. So you had just made a comment that we have an incredibly striated income tax structure. I just want to be clear that it's the lowest end is 3%, the highest end is just shy of 7%. I think that we have a ways to go compared to states like New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, maybe less Massachusetts, but certainly New York and New Jersey, where their top tax bracket caps out at 9 or just over 9%. And New York City even has a couple extra percentage points for their millionaires there. I view the income tax as a way to offset how regressive our sales tax and how regressive our property tax is. And that, of course, is reflected in our studies that we've done now twice over the last decade, just showing how disproportionately our tax structure affects people in the middle class and lower. So that's how I want to start this, because the main question I have is do we have an idea about how this $400 million tax cut actually equates into dollars per person that will be getting this?
Yes, we'll make those attribution tables available to you shortly. As I indicated earlier, it's goes up to about $600, just under $600 for joint filers in the, I think it's the 75 to 150 range. It goes up to about 300 for single filers in that range or slightly lower. But we will provide the incidence or the attribution table to the committee as well. There is in our presentation the graphic that showed that 77% of the benefits go to those under 150,000.
And this tax cut is not permanent, correct? It's just going to be for this biennium?
No, it's a permanent tax cut.
It'll be a permanent tax cut. Great.
Sure.
And another question I have is about our DRS agents. My understanding is that we have about $3 billion worth of uncollected taxes per year. And that in studies that I've seen, each additional revenue agent will bring in about $1 million worth of that revenue that is already owed to the state. Are there any plans in place to hire more agents? Because my understanding is that right now the organization is strapped for this labor and could use that additional help.
Yes, DRS is planning on bringing in 5 new funded employees in the current fiscal year, as a matter of fact, for the revenue auditing and forecasting unit to facilitate. They have a new capability, an IT capability to identify, debts that are owed in terms of taxation. It's about $40 million. They think we'll be able to generate new revenue from that effort. I think it involves artificial intelligence or something. It's some kind of algorithm that tells them to audit, that sort of thing.
Is there a point of diminishing returns that the reason the office is saying that we should be hiring 5 as opposed to significantly more, since seems to be significantly more than $40 million out there of uncollected taxes?
Well, I think this new IT protocol that they're bringing in will facilitate that collection effort. We absolutely believe that everyone who owes taxes should pay them. And if they are in arrears, we should find them and make them do so. But we are providing resources there, both in terms of the IT, which will facilitate these new individuals who will be working in that collection effort.
Great. And then my final question is there's a proposal by myself and colleagues that addresses bracket creep. This is where because of inflation and CPI increase, that your marginal utility of every dollar that you earn lessens over time, and yet you can be going into higher and higher tax brackets if we don't increase our marginal tax bracket numbers. Is there intent by the governor's office to address this problem?
Well, that sounds, I think it would sound to my boss like a tax increase. And he said that he's not interested in tax increases. He's interested in more taxpayers.
Let me clarify. The tax increase happens if we don't do anything, in that if you make $55,000 this year, $60,000 next year, et cetera, but the marginal tax bracket is staying the same, you are going up. I'm explaining this very, very poorly. So if someone else wants to jump in at some point, that would be great. But the idea is that you are getting punished by our tax code by the fact that you are going up into higher brackets at a faster pace than inflation. Anyway, I'll leave it through you because I know I explained that very poorly and I wasn't really ready to explain that. So you and I can talk offline, Jeff. Thanks.
I'm advised that you're discussing, I think, the indexing of our
indexing. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The short answer is that would produce a revenue loss. So we'd have to calculate what that is before we signed up for something like that.
Great. Thank you. And I'm all set, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative. Next on my list, I have Representative Piscopo, followed by Representative Lamar, Representative Carney, and Representative Mesker. So Representative Piscopo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize to the chairs for being a little late, and Mr. Secretary, sorry I'm late. Ribbon cutting in the district. I was listening though on the way up. Just quickly on the budget, on the bond package. I've always publicly applauded the governor's. He he claimed that a debt, he kind of quoted a debt diet. So I've always kind of very, very much highly approved of his bonding policies. And it seems to have continued in this budget. I'm encouraged by that. In my tenure, I've seen a lot of governors going into their second term and kind of fall off the diet, if you will. And but he's sticking to that policy, and I'm happy to see it. And it strikes a balance between very, very sound borrowing and allowing some of our individual projects in our districts to proceed also. So it strikes a good balance, I think. My question goes to Town Aid Road. We can't go to a council of governments meeting or visit our first selectman's office, Mr. Secretary, without hearing about, those certain kind of funds. Can you just touch on that program, that our Town Aid Road funding?
Sure. Well, it's one that we would fully fund, as we always do. It's $60 million. We're just proposing to do it out of the STF resources for the next 2 years instead of bonding for it. That way we can save the debt service costs.
Oh, okay. All right. I would, I haven't had a chance to really go through the package really clear. I've been very busy since we got our books the other day, but I haven't had a chance to really analyze that. So thank you for that clarification. And I think the only place we go toward any kind of borrowing restraint is on the liabilities, the unfunded liabilities. And I see some new borrowing in housing, energy. Have you thought about going into delving into our unfunded liabilities as part of the new borrowing, or is that something we look at into the near future?
Well, we wouldn't, I wouldn't recommend that we undertake any borrowing to deal with our unfunded liabilities. We did do that a few years ago with teachers' retirement under a different governor that I worked for. I'm not sure that was the right thing to do, but we still have those bonds outstanding. We are trying to every year with our surplus and our waterfall out of the budget reserve fund, pay down those unfunded liabilities. We made great progress in the last couple of years. We've probably saved $500 million on the general fund, all things being equal, with the waterfall deposits we've made to date. We, as I just indicated earlier, going to save another 200 million with this year's deposit into the unfunded liabilities. So we want to keep that going. We're happy to see the guardrails were renewed for 5 years. So we're going to keep that progress going. We're going to make sizable deposits into that, as I showed on the earlier slide. You were probably driving up. That we're going to see sizable deposits over the next couple of years, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to have to set some aside to get the BRF up to 18% instead of 15%, but we'll still be making sizable deposits from surpluses, at least as we project today, into the pension funds.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Lamar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the presentation today. The thoroughness of both your commentary and your ability to answer so many questions. I have almost all of my questions answered by prior folks, except one. And I know that I'll have an opportunity as we go through the STO bonding process and that subcommittee review. I want to make sure that we keep an eye on that 2026 in the red aspect of your presentation and what we plan to do to address that. I'm recognizing that my internet is a little spotty here, so I'm going to cut this short, except to say I do think we need to be laser focused on the reality of the opportunity that we have to maximize federal funding with a depleting resource in our STO, and whether or not moving Town Aid Road into the STO is a proper choice to make at this point in time, whether or not we'll be able to sustain that in the future, whether that will compromise our ability to maximize federal infrastructure dollars. So with all that being said and my internet spotting out, I'd also like to just add my support for what Representative Brown and Representative Elliott both highlighted with respect to baby bonds and the progressivity of our tax code. I know this is the beginning of this process. I know there's a lot more to come. I look forward to working with you moving forward. Thanks again.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Carney.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation. I didn't get a chance to see the whole thing, but I'm going to go back and look through it. I just have a couple of questions. Maybe some suggestions. I heard you mention food tax when you were answering Representative Farrar's question. And I was just wondering, this has been something that has frustrated me ever since I really took a deep dive into it. Has the administration ever, considered changing the way the food tax currently works? I mean, for example, if you go and buy a banana at Starbucks, you pay a tax. If you buy 6 bananas, or if you buy bananas at a supermarket, you don't. If you get a banana, if you get a soda at Subway, you pay a sales tax. If you get a soda at the supermarket, you don't. So I don't know if the administration has ever really looked at that, and how we could make it, I guess in a way more logical. I don't know if I want to say fair, but potentially fair. Potentially, you could focus on healthier foods regardless of where you purchase them as not being taxed. So I guess that's sort of like a suggestion, but also a question to see if the administration's ever really looked at that.
Yes, we look at that issue and others in the tax area all the time. I think that the crux of your question revolves around the definition in the sales tax exemption section around meals. What's a meal? And I think we did have some excitement about that a few years ago, if I recall. So yes, we've clearly looked at it, but we're happy to look at it again along the lines that you suggest. I'm happy to talk to you further about that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Just a plug, I did put in a bill to remove the sales tax on gym memberships. So it kind of goes along with like the staying healthy thing, but we can talk about that another time. My other question is regarding, I guess, how addiction services and mental health services are funded. I'm just curious, and I apologize if you did touch upon this, but I'm curious, with the tobacco funds, which in years past have been zeroed out for the purpose of assisting those who are addicted to tobacco or have health effects from tobacco. I mean, similar things with alcohol, with marijuana and things like that. So I'm just curious, how much of those dollars is actually going to go to addiction services and mental health services?
I don't believe that the Tobacco and Health Trust Fund monies go for that. I think we have other funds for that. I think this is around prevention activities, around anti-smoking campaign, that sort of thing.
Okay. But is there any, because for example, I have a bill to take sales tax revenue from alcohol. And I obviously it'd be a large sum. So, I know the governor probably wouldn't want it all to go there, but and taking some of that and putting it towards a few different services regarding addiction and prevention and things like that. So I guess, my question really is, what in this budget, how much in this budget is going to that, and how much of those dollars from things like cigarettes, from things like marijuana, from things like alcohol are actually going to those purposes?
Well, I think those are all general fund revenue sources. We don't at OPM typically recommend revenue intercepts or special accounts that dedicate specific spending from specific revenues. Although I will note that the cannabis revenue does go to special funds, and they are spending money at Demas on that issue, prevention as well as treatment. There is in the Demas budget funding for those kinds of programs that you allude to, but they're appropriated funds. Their source of revenue is the general fund, not specific one-off pieces of taxes. And we generally like to avoid that. It's hard to budget. It's hard to keep track of. It's hard for transparency where the money's coming from and where it's going.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And I'd love to talk to you further about this. Is an issue that's important to me. I'd love to talk to you more about what I think the state could spend money on, but again, we can do that offline. But thank you very much for the presentation.
Happy to do that, sir.
Thank you, Representative Meskers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I did catch a good portion of it in my rather lengthy drive up, so I want to thank you for the efforts. I don't know that I heard or completely understood the mechanism, and if this is the appropriate form to address the increase from 15 to 18% in the reserve fund. Statutorily, the rainy day fund, is that going to be a dollar for dollar increment, or is it going to be, I understood that it might be a 50-50 split between debt pay down and augment to the fund.
I would need to consult. You just passed this yesterday. You're asking a question about the effect of what you did yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a staff over here that can explain it to you. I think that's their
Okay.
job. My understanding is we're going from 15% as a waterfall threshold in the BRF budget reserve fund to an 18%. It's not happening until next fiscal year. I got that right?
Right. So I'll be looking for questions going forward, then I'll
So-
table the question on the implementation, but it'll be the mechanism in the implementation. And if it's drawn down, how it's replenished versus debt retirement versus rainy day. So I'd love to know that mechanism as we look at
Well,
going forward.
Yeah.
But
Right.
we can,
Yeah, okay. It's the same mechanisms for replenishment. It's the volatility cap as well as whatever the current year surplus is. So it will still have a source. It's just going to, we're going to need some current year surplus to get it up to 18.
in some of the original conversation, wasn't clear to me whether it was dollar for dollar directly into the reserve into rainy day or getting to the 18 was going to be split. And I'm
not clear on that either, but we're going to look at that closely soon.
okay. So I'll table that. The second question is more related to my concerns or the opportunities in conversations that I continue to have. I understand from DECD that their budgetary request on with the governors looking for grant writing and looking for the ability to draw down on infrastructure funds.
Mhm.
So within your budgetary framework now, we're all over the place as far as I can see at the federal level in terms of matching dollars versus absolute grants. And I'm not sure how we hit the mark and what budgetary leeway or how you feel you're positioned going forward in the solicitation of infrastructure funds. I mean, there's going to be two components. One is going to maybe change our own capital outlays if the federal government is providing us. And that is either a positive or negative depending on the matching funds. I'm not sure what the plug figure and how much flexibility you have there on the multi-billion dollars that potentially could show up in our coffers and the matching funds.
Right.
Just more of a thought on how you're going to approach it.
There's a couple of things, three or four things in your question there. Firstly, DECD is getting new resources in our proposed budget for contract specialist grant writer types to get out the door the projects under Urban Act and Community Investment Fund. So and we'll be talking to our friends later this afternoon about that. With regard to the federal infrastructure funds, that's principally DOT, DEEP, and DPH who are getting the lion's share of those. And those commissioners and their staffs are standing ready, and we're providing new resources to certainly DOT for that purpose. It's a complicated system, as you know. There are both competitive grants and formula grants that are coming down to the states through the IIJA. But those agencies, we've provided for them both in terms of capital and some ARPA last year to match what's coming down, what we anticipate will be sufficient to match in those categories available funding for those projects.
But there's a potential, pardon, Madam Chair, if I could, there's a potential for incremental needs depending on the matching requests coming, or the matching requirements out of the federal government yet. That's kind of a question.
We believe we have the resources to match. If we don't, we will absolutely see what we have to do to make sure that we do. The governor absolutely wants to maximize participation in that federal infrastructure funds.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. We have next Representative Parveris DeBraw, followed by Representative Dencha.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair. Wonderful to see you in that spot. Also, I just want to thank Secretary Beckham and everyone on the staff, because I know that this represents months and months worth of effort on your part to get these, reports together, the pie charts, the bar graphs, all of it. I have been listening in, but was also in transit myself. I did want to circle back to the child tax credit. You know, this was such a landmark help for so many families last year. In fact, I think it was more than 3/4 of our state was able to benefit from this in terms of the families. I know when I was knocking doors, I heard about, you know, what a huge help it was to families. And we did already have the EITC in place. So certainly, I think that, you know, this was a significant lift for them. And we are the only high cost state that doesn't have that permanent tax credit in place. So I guess what my question is, you know, when it costs middle income families approximately $17,000 a year to raise their families, you know, why does Connecticut not need a child tax credit? Because we didn't see it in the governor's budget proposal.
Well, as I previously responded, the EITC itself has a child tax, how it's a child care, a child credit component, in as much as you get more of a benefit, the more dependents you have, up to 3 dependents. The broad-based tax relief provides tax relief to everyone permanently, regardless of whether you have children or not. So it will help those families with children as well.
Okay, I guess my next question would be, do you believe that the way that these new proposals are set up, that they're going to work in a similar fashion to how the the indexing of the income tax to inflation?
Well, we're not indexing the income tax to inflation. That would be a revenue loss, as my colloquy with Representative Elliott indicated. But we do hope that these are helpful cuts to or increases to family budgets, and will be a permanent relief for families with kids and those who don't happen to have kids, and that it will help folks during this period when we've still got persistently high inflation. But more to the point, the governor believes, and I'll say it again, in an era in which we are running consistently surpluses at the state level, it's time to let more money stay with our taxpayers instead of coming to Hartford.
I can appreciate that. And I do think that you're right. It does alleviate inflationary pressures at this time. I guess my concern is more of the long haul and what that does or does not do. But thank you so much for answering the questions and for being with us today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Dunn-Scho.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Beckham for your presentation this morning. I represent the town of Stratford, and my question is going to refer to the tipping fees that you talked about in your presentation. Stratford is one of the larger towns, and our waste pickup is done through our municipal taxes. So I'm just wondering how increasing the tipping fee is a benefit to towns like mine, where we have the infrastructure for recycling. We've got plans to do a composting area in our town that has a lot of other environmental impacts associated with it. We are complying with the governor's initiative to increase housing. We've got 6 housing developments either in progress or in the very near future going to be planned. More people, bring more trash. So I'm just wondering how the $3 per ton fee is incentivizing towns like mine.
The point of the solid waste assessment would be to gather some revenue together to begin doing kind of support programs for municipalities to assist them with their municipal solid waste disposal deficits, as well as at some point provide a source of revenue in case we have to build new infrastructure in the state to deal with the municipal solid waste disposal issues. As a state, we have a problem. We have a large amount of trash that was being disposed of in our state according to law, but that capacity is going away. So we need to do some planning. The fear is that the cost of that will only increase if towns have to ship their waste out of state. That will be costly to the towns, costly to the environment. So we have to.
No, yeah. Go ahead.
We have to create some programs to give information and support to municipalities about how to deal with that. And this will raise funds for that, as well as I indicated, potentially for some infrastructure down the road to deal with that issue.
Thank you for that explanation. I just wanted to be clear that larger towns like mine are going to be paying for that through our own large tipping fees. And I feel like larger towns are going to be penalized more. It's more of a penalty.
Well, the penalty will come when we all have to pay more for trash disposal, and we have to plan for that and try to keep it as inexpensive as possible and as least harmful to the environment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see any other hands at the moment, so I'm going to, oh, Senator Wong. I was getting itchy for my second round, but go ahead, Senator.
I won't be long. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Secretary, for your work. Still working
I
through
was
the.
senator a minute ago, but anyway.
Well, you can, you control the budget, so you can
I've
be
been
anything you
demoted.
want. That being said, thank you, and I apologize if I'm asking questions that have been repeated. We were driving up and was indeed listening. The medical debt purchase. Now, it sounds like an innovative program. There's an outside company that's going to purchase this debt, pennies on the dollar. My question is, how are they going to recoup that? Are they going to be going after the same debtors with a far more aggressive collection and foreclosure? Do we have any mechanism and understanding how they're going to recoup that purchase?
Well, I don't have that detail, but I know they are a nonprofit dedicated to this. They don't go after the debtor, but they fundraise, for example. I had the same question. How does this work? Right. We give them the ARPA money that they take and buy it back from the healthcare facilities, the hospitals principally, and they work with them to identify their lowest income, most in need debtors. But they are a private nonprofit and they fundraise for their own expenses.
I appreciate hearing that. It's kind of shifting it to a nonprofit that's doing this. So in essence, it's a loan forgiveness, but another entity through our money is kind of administering it. And I appreciate the administration's concern, because I'm fearful, and thank you for answering, is the fact that I do not want those very collectors much more aggressively going after those individuals. So thank you for answering that. The second question.
Neither do we.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarity. The second question, as relates to transportation as a ranking, is I didn't see it clearly outlined, or is it a work in progress? How do you envision this budget as relates to the STF and funding transportation projects fit in with the infrastructure funds from the federal government that's being kind of coordinated through Commissioner Boughton through the BUILT program? Can you give some sense of the collaboration, the connectivity, the consideration in addition to the additional supplemental funds? And has the OPM office, in concert with the Department of Transportation, coordinated and set up a list of priority projects that the legislature and its representatives for each respective town and regions can anticipate what you deem as priorities and projects moving forward? So 2 questions on that.
Yep.
The collaboration with the BUILT program using infrastructure money, federal, and 2, do you have, in collaboration with DOT, a priority list that you could share with the legislative body?
So as you know, the governor's delegated Commissioner Boughton to coordinate that with the agencies that are principally involved in matching the federal funds. It's DOT, DEEP, and DPH. And he and Commissioner Euclid are collaborating on that issue. I'm sure we can get from them what they have on that for you in terms of a priority and what they're working on, what's coming down the pike. In response to an earlier question, I point out that there are both competitive and formula grants coming down from the IIJA. Some of it we will be able to get, some of it we might not, but we are standing up with the resources necessary to take as full advantage as we can to get leverage as much of that federal money into our state as we possibly can.
Thank you for that clarity. And would it be fair to say for our municipal leaders that if you have projects, you shouldn't just be submitting proposals, you should be working on permitting and literally getting these projects shovel ready in order to take advantage of the available resources and consideration? Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Senator. Any other members that have questions before it's round 2 for you? Anyone with the first round? Seeing none, I'll let the administrator correct me if I'm wrong. I have a couple of second round of questions. My questions are concerned with the new municipal structure, municipal revenue sharing fund structure. And the aims there. And one of the things that I wanted to clarify, I believe it is the case that under the new structure that you are proposing, it essentially brings certain expenditures that were previously off budget on budget, which I believe has the effect of essentially preventing approximately 170 million in new spending that would otherwise be allowable under the cap. Is that your understanding as well?
No, not to my knowledge. No, it does bring it under the spending cap.
But if it
We
brings it under the,
rebased, we
is it
rebased, we rebased the cap whenever we bring things underneath. We have $57 million of spending cap room with our budget proposals in the first year, about 400 in room in the second year.
But just that's a macro number, very specifically with respect to this. So if we're bringing this, use this rough number of 170 million on budget, that is accounted for with a rebase for the
Yes.
cap. Okay, thank you very much. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. So a question about paying off the gap bonds,
Yes, ma'am.
which obviously those are higher interest bonds. We're saving in terms of interest. When will does that fully pay off our gap bond indebtedness? And if not, when will it be?
It does pay it off. And we would then be relieved of the obligation.
Okay, well,
That's why we could use the $120 million going forward instead of for that.
That's good and quick and dirty. The other question is regard to the pass-through entity tax,
Yes, ma'am.
making it optional. Do you see a decline in payment? Because just looking at what OFA sent me with regard to the Q4 payments, I see estimates and finals were below about 290 million, but the pass-through entity tax continued to overperform by about 156 million. Do you anticipate a decline? Because this is not only totally outperformed what the initial projections were, but continues to, reap big dividends from this.
We projected we would get the revenue one way or another, that it's an option for them. They can either pay the personal income tax or continue to do the pass-through entity tax. But
So you see this as totally revenue neutral?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Maskers, did I see your hand up for a second time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Related to the medical debt purchase, I'd be interested in further details at some point on that medical debt purchase. I'm concerned on two levels, with the level of transparency and the level of funding we provide, depending on who the current holder of that debt is, that the chances that these resources will drive up the price before we go to debt forgiveness can be a problem. So in the mechanism for the auctions, I think how we look at the auctions, how we price the auctions, how we offer people the opportunity to tender their debt for debt forgiveness is super important. Or I don't know how
It's not an application by the debtor. They work with the hospital to identify their debtors and identify that they're lower income and are needy. It's not an application by the individual. This group goes and finds the debtors at the healthcare facilities.
Well, then my only concern would be that the group's ability to negotiate the price at the debt forgiveness, because you're going for uncollected or difficult debt, and now you're putting the state as the intermediary to pay for the debt. So I might have the debt at 10 cents on the dollar. When the state shows up to repurchase it, I might price it at 20 or 30 cents on the dollar.
Right.
So it's the question of the effectiveness in the purchase and the mechanism that we maximize the debt forgiveness and benefit to the individuals and get the most bang for our buck, because I'm worried with state resources, this uncollected debt goes up in value, we're paying windfalls in terms of the settlements.
Well, we agree with those concerns. It's been successfully rolled out in a couple of municipalities in the Midwest and at least one in New England. And they have been able to leverage 100 to 1 from the outlay to the debt that's retired. And we'll be looking closely at how they do that and making sure through whatever contract we have with them that they target the lowest income people, and they do so in a way that maximizes the 20 million in ARPA that we're going to let them have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I will go next to Vice Chair Farrar, but I also just want to note, I know this is obvious to everyone who's been in this before, but there've been lots of requests for additional information. I just want to make sure that any additional information you do provide, you send to the committee administrator so it can be distributed to the entire committee. Thank you. Vice Chair Farrar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick follow-up questions. Just my first question is particularly around the capital budget proposals for housing. I know for all of us, housing is front and center, as you noted, as a significant need, but we also know that our communities and our state as a whole face great inequities in regards to who can access a lot of that housing. So can you speak to how the approaches in your housing proposal actually address equity for our state?
Yes, the idea, well, first of all, it's $600 million. A large proportion of it is for affordable housing, which by its definition is about equity, but also as well workforce housing, which is for folks at a slightly higher level, but who need housing as well. We detailed the numbers, the allocation between those in the slide deck, but I can tell you that there's also a bill, Senate Bill 985, which is governor's bill incentivizing housing production we're standing up the MRDA, the Municipal Regional Development Authority, to be around the state, do for around the state what CERTA does for the capital region for Hartford in terms of housing. I don't think they'll be running venues elsewhere, but for housing, MRDA will be collecting proposals from towns that develop housing growth zones and that have downtown development districts that include, for example, transit-oriented development, transit in the region. And the idea there is to prioritize proposals that will allow what's the so-called missing middle housing as of right within the housing growth zone, and use and for those towns that use one-stop shop permitting that facilitates that kind of development. So we've got some policy proposals as well as the capital authorization that we're proposing to try to drive some development of housing for lower income and working families.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I definitely think more detail around how we're really utilizing our assets of the transit-oriented communities we already have, and that every town should and could be taking advantage of that is critical. And then my second question, I saw it referenced in a few different places in the proposal, but can you just share what you see as the major reasons overall for the projected reduction in the volatility cap adjustment?
I'm not sure I followed that.
So I think I saw in a couple places that the
Oh.
volatility cap was referenced as.
Yes, you're
Changing.
referring to our consensus revenue. The source of the volatility cap deposits are the estimates and finals and the pass-through entity tax, and those are down. We're projecting those to be down year over year because we had an extraordinary year last year, and we expect, based on what we're seeing in the economy, that we're projecting, I think it's -16. Although we're ahead of that at the moment. We check that every day, every week. We're still ahead of that. We're within our projection. It's a consensus projection we have with OFA. We both have economic forecasting shops that we work with, independent firms. They have one, we have a different one, but we have a consensus that it's in that range, and it's over the next little while, those sources of the volatility cap will be in some decline.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Administrator, do you see any other hands up or anyone else? Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, we passed out an ESER bill. Secretary, that's right.
You're going
I
to
could
have
make you a senator and make
bigger
you
business
suffer.
card after today. You have a lot of
senator
I'll
and
give you
make
my
you suffer.
business card, Senator.
So yesterday we passed an ESER bill, and one of the big parts of it was obviously the excess cost for special education. I appreciate the governor's leadership on addressing this issue. Obviously, our education committee and appropriations will make some determinations of how we address it. But can you offer the administration's perspective on a budgetary of how we can address the excess costs for special education and how we have a vision moving forward? Because it's a challenge. It's a tremendous challenge that has not been fully funded. Maybe it's out of the purview through you, Madam Chair, but it is one that tremendously impacts all of our school districts, and particularly the IDD community and students that have struggled, as every student have struggled. But I see the IDD community struggling through the COVID learning disconnect. So the IED and the one-to-one, does the administration, through their budgetary vision in following up to that special ESERT funding for the excess cost, can you give us some guidance on that? Obviously, I always want to defer to the legislative committees on education and appropriations as well, but I'd like to get your thoughts.
Well, that's an important component of the state support to local districts for education. We are proposing to continue to phase in the new ECS formula that's phasing in over this decade, hundreds of millions of dollars going to municipalities over this decade. We'll be talking to your colleagues in appropriations later today. It's 46 million in the first year. It's 91 million in the second year. The excess costs of we recently increased that. I think it was 15 million in the last year, and this language change you had to do last year, yesterday, allows us to fully appropriate that and get that out the door this current year, so that it releases the money that you appropriated for that extra money last year. In addition, you mentioned the learning loss issue, which is a problem. We have some persistent absenteeism, particularly in our urban areas, and we're providing additional ARPA funding for a home visitation program called the Learner Engagement and Attendance Program, to try and support those families and those kids who need some supports or some kind of service to get them back in school, and otherwise getting back in the habit of learning. It's something, unfortunately, a lot of them lost during the pandemic. We've got some other ARPA money that's going to the Department of Education for some workforce development to provide professional support to address academic recovery, particularly upskilling the paraprofessionals who are out there to get them better able to deal with some of the kids they have to deal with. So a number of things in the education area. We're continuing the strong support that the state has always provided for local education in K-12. I believe we are number 2 in the nation in per pupil expenditures, and we want to keep that kind of progress going.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And it shows your experience and expertise in the arena. And I'm always admiring as you read through that 3-ring binder, that's full of information. So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing your insight.
They issue
with us.
these to secretaries.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator. I want to, Senator Fonfara, do you have a?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Morning, sir.
And my question and comment should not be taken as an indication of my position on the proposal, but more about clarification and perspective. Do you happen to know how much the pass-through MD tax credit that we provide currently affords businesses with respect to a federal savings, federal income tax savings?
We can get you that number. We don't have that calculated, but we can work on that for you.
The number I'm told, I don't know if it jives with the number that your folks will have, is about $240 million versus I think it's 60 that we are currently. That's what you anticipate the revenue loss being if we get rid of what I call the notch.
Correct.
So you made the comment that that was done solely to raise revenue. I think you could say that about every single tax that we have in the state of Connecticut is done to raise revenue. And your budget has a lot of taxes in there. I don't know how we distinguish one versus another, particularly when we gave and continue to give a substantial break. I don't know if every state that has been affected by SALT is given a similar credit. But you're right, we did it to raise revenue and we will lose revenue here. I think you made a comment once or twice today about if we can fit things within the budget. Governor made the comment in his budget address, if we want to do more, showed me the revenue. These all things are balanced. It's, our perspective as individual legislators, as a collective legislature, and then there's the governor's perspective, and we'll work through that as we always do. But I just wanted to put some perspective on this, that yes, it was a revenue raising. It has been a revenue raising initiative, but in balance, we have provided a significant benefit to businesses in our state by passing the credit and continuing to have that credit. Again, not necessarily a comment on my position on the governor's proposal, but just perspective for today.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Seeing no further questions, I again want to thank you for being here today, for being available to ask some questions, to provide additional information. I want to note, as others have, we recognize this is a tremendous amount of work for you, as is evident by the thick binders and books that we all are carrying around in our bags, particularly in a dynamic environment, which is the legislative environment. Where things change day to day, not to mention just in our economy, but also in our legislative process. And we welcome you to the legislative body today, where we apparently turned you into a legislator. So
I've been called worse.
Thank you. I'll try to come up with a new title for you, but I'll just stick with secretary. Thank you, and your team.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And good luck this afternoon in your appropriations meeting.
It's a big day for us. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will note that the Finance, Revenue and Bonding Committee's next meeting is on Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, in this room and on Zoom. Anything else that we should note? Thank you all, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.